your location, your hotspot. Tell us where you're tuning in from today. And we're excited to kind of hear where everyone is coming in this afternoon across the country. So make sure you drop in your location. And again, we'll get started here in about 5 minutes, and we'll see you right then. Hello, everyone. Welcome to our insider session this afternoon. We will be getting started here at the top of the hour. So this is our 2-minute warning. So as we get started, we'd love to hear where you're tuning in from. Make sure you drop your location in the chat today. We'd love to hear from you and drop in any questions as we go through the session, where we really talk about what it means to get a seat at the decision makers table in today's selling market. So as we gear up for today's session, I wanted to give a shout out for our upcoming annual Sandler Summit 2025. That will be taking place in Orlando, Florida on April 2nd and 3rd. This is a world-class sales and leadership conference, and we invite you to really tune in and get a sneak peek today, because our speaker is actually going to be one of many speakers that will be presenting at our summit down in Orlando. This will be a conference where we talk all about trends, how to tackle AI, how to become the best seller and the most elite seller in today's market. So we'd love for you to start checking out the agenda, some of the guest speakers that we have coming. Make sure you visit sandler.com/summit to get your tickets and start figuring out your travel, because we know we want you there. It's a great time of year to experience the tropical environment outside, and it is truly going to be an exciting event like no other and equip you to be your best self in 2025. So we are about 1 minute away. So again, if you're just coming in, would love to hear where you're tuning in from. Make sure you drop that in the chat. And as we go through the session this afternoon, feel free to drop in any questions or comments that you have. Towards the end, we will try to circle back around and give John any of those questions to see if we can get a couple of answers. But we are going to go ahead. It is 2 o'clock, so top of the hour gets started. I'm super honored and excited to announce today's speaker. So John Rosso is really recognized nationally, I should say, for being a business development expert. He is a David H. Sandler Award winner. He is the author of Prospecting the Sandler Way and co-author of 21st Century Prospecting. And he has helped over 200,000 sellers through his work in selling, leadership, business development. And I'm super excited to have him here today. So welcome, John. Excited to have you. And I know they're excited to get this started.
Well, thanks, Emily. I appreciate it very, very much. Thanks, everyone, for joining. I know the time is valuable. Today ought to be a lot of fun. We were talking about getting a seat at the decision makers table, as well as how do we manage this whole enterprise sale with multiple stakeholders. And so a couple stylistic things. If you've ever been to the Sandler Summit, great, come back. If you haven't, attend. I'm going to be speaking at the next one. We'd love to see you there. As a couple of ground rules, I tend to speak a little bit quickly. That's my problem, not yours, as a native New Yorker. So bear with me. I also like to name things. So we're going to talk about a number of techniques, tactics, and strategies on an enterprise sale. And I'm going to try to name as many as I can. So if you got a chance to sort of review the YouTube, you can have those names stick in your head. So a couple things, most of you know this, that more and more stakeholders are getting involved in an enterprise sale. Gartner would say 6 to 10, up to 14. Over 75% of new pursuits have at least 3 departments involved. In today's 2025, we're seeing higher executive involvement in an enterprise sale. Often 65% of the time, a C-level executive may be involved. So if you're not getting to that C level, again, depending upon what you're selling, you could take that as a sign that you may not be in the driver's seat to win. A couple things I'll do from an attitude perspective. First of all, one of the challenges I think people have is the larger the deal, the more emotionally involved we can get. So I want to give us a couple things that help us be gutsy during an enterprise pursuit. One of them is it's really hard to ask a good prospect a reasonable question and have them get upset. Let me say that again. It's really hard to ask a good prospect a reasonable question and have them get upset. For instance, if you said, well, can you sort of share with me your timeline or how the paperwork might make it through the organization in a project like this? If they say, hey, listen, that's none of your business. We asked you for a proposal. Odds are you didn't ask the question poorly. Odds are that you caught them in a bit of a lie, right? Like the buyer's system, which likely means, again, you don't have that inside driver's angle to be able to win this deal. So again, it's really hard to ask a good prospect a reasonable question and have them get angry. Second is if you feel it, say it gently, and gently matters, meaning if you're seeing something, feeling something, smelling something that's just not adding it up, calling out that game is a very, very positive thing to do. If you feel it, say it gently. One of the challenges is some salespeople are still stuck completely in relationship mode, and getting relationships is important. The mindset of I've worked so hard to build this relationship, now I don't want to do anything that might jeopardize this relationship is a negative mindset. A better mindset is I've worked so hard to build this relationship that's earned me the right to ask difficult questions and get answers to them without offending because I've built in a relationship. So I think those are some of the things you want to think about, because qualitatively, we really need to invest our time wisely, because an enterprise sale can be a very, very expensive sale if we come in second and we don't win. We might have spent hundreds of thousands of dollars potentially on that pursuit. So let's hop in, and I'm going to sort of jump around on different tactics. You can work with Emily on YouTube if you've got some questions that you want to ask at the end. One is I see a lot of people confuse what I would call a coach and a champion. And again, people can define things differently. I'm going to give you my definition. CSO Insights, another organization, has uncovered, which is no surprise, that your win rate with a champion is 2.5 times higher than without a champion. Anybody who's been selling at the enterprise level can feel that. But I do think there's confusion between a coach and a champion. And so what I mean by that is all champions are coaches, but not all coaches are champions. All coaches aren't champions, but all. So here's what it sounds like. A coach may want you to win, which we love, but may or may not be willing to invest his or her social and political capital on your behalf. A champion, in my definition, is someone who's willing to go out on that limb, invest his or her social and political capital on your behalf. And one of the things we need to do is we make a lot of mistakes. One, we have happy ears. We're hearing someone who could be a champion and go, they really want us to win. Anybody who says this to me, I got a great champion. She just will not get me in front of the decision maker. By definition, that's not a champion. Could be a wonderful coach, could be a great source of information, but again, maybe unwilling to invest that political capital. Again, think about it this way. If I'm with a decision maker and I say, well, what do you think? Would you like to move forward? And the decision maker says, I love you, John. Love your solution. It's elegant. We know it's the right thing to do. At this point, we just can't move forward. It's not the right time. Clearly, I didn't win. Well, if you ask your decision maker to make that decision to get you, if you ask your champion to make that decision to get you in front of that decision maker and they say, love you, John. We know it's the right thing to do. We just can't or won't do that. We really haven't sold the champion. So one of the techniques that we like to name is called passing the baton of power, passing the baton of power. So here I am with a would-be champion who has said, they're all for me. They have shared with me also that they're not the one who signs and releases the budget. I want to find out if I have a champion. And so what it might sound like is this. Ms. Champion, let me ask you this. And I know you and I and our teams have invested a fair amount of time together, and you've been clear that Ms. Decision Maker clearly owns that budget. In the end, it will be her decision. She looks to you for input, of course. I guess my question, Ms. Champion, is if this was your decision alone, and I certainly understand that it's not, you've been clear on Ms. Decision Maker's role, but if this was your decision alone and Ms. Decision Maker wasn't involved, what would you do? Would you be saying, hey, John, this makes sense. This is the timeline we talked about. Get me that proposal. I'll sign it, turn it around, and we'll start to put plans in place to execute. What would you do? Anything other than an unequivocal yes is a no. I think so. I still would have to evaluate my options. That's a no. I think so. But I would have to still make sure the business case, that's a no. Anything other than an unequivocal yes is a no, right? So I want to be able to understand that. Now, again, that doesn't mean she's a champion yet. But let me take you through that. One, will pass the baton of power. Let's assume she says, if it's my decision, absolutely. No question. I would be signing today. Relax. The next thing you ought to say is, you know what, Ms. Champion, I was hoping you'd say that. Tell me why. Simple question, but essentially what you're going to get is a preview as to what she's going to say to the decision maker. So rather than go, great, go, yeah, I was hoping you'd say that. Tell me why. Right? Now, I ask a lot of people here, what's your goal from here on in? And some people say, my goal is to prepare my champion to talk to the decision maker. And that may be a good goal, but our first goal ought to be to get in front of the decision maker and get a seat at that decision maker's table. When I ask people how they typically do that today, they make a mistake. They do something called a permission-based question. Here's what it sounds like. Hey, I'm acting as a salesperson to my champion again. Hey, Ms. Champion, would it be possible for you and I to have a chance to sit down with Ms. Decision Maker? Mistake. It's a permission-based question. If we think about non-decision makers, they tend to be slightly more risk averse. So their brain is going at 1,000,000 miles an hour. Is there any risk? Is there any risk? Is there any risk? Odds are they see one risk and they say things like this. Tell me, you don't have to tell me, think. Have you ever heard these words before? They say things like, yeah, I think that makes sense. I'll tell you what, let me talk to her first. And then you watch things sort of go down the tubes. Instead, use social proof, right? Use a third-party story to sort of change the risk profile. What it might sound like is this. Ms. Champion, can I make a suggestion? Of course, John. What is it? Here's what I found to be most effective moving forward at this point in the process. Let's find a time where you, me, and Ms. Decision Maker have a chance to sit down, because in that meeting, we both have a role, right? Your role, clearly, as the insider, is the one who understands the dynamics of the organization, the goals of the organization, some of the due diligence you've done in looking into solutions. I can't do that. Only you can. My role as the solution provider, I'm the only one that can really talk through timing, expertise, competencies, outcomes, risks. We both have a role. What's the best way to get that coordinated? That's a third-party story. And I love the phrase, we name this, we both have a role, right? We both have a role. Now, if I can't get in front of that person, at least initially, I've got to do something called rehearsal. Right? Rehearsal might sound like this, because perhaps she says you can never get in front of the decision maker. She is a cloistered monk and doesn't talk to anybody but except through a keyhole in a door, which of course is crazy. But if I can't get to that decision maker, I've got to do a good job rehearsing my champion. And again, what it sounds like is this. Ms. Champion, let me ask you this. When you walk into Ms. Decision Maker's office, and you share with her that you've made the decision to recommend moving forward with us, what do you think she'll say? Now, out of role play, notice I made her a decision maker. When you walk into Ms. Decision Maker's office and share with her that you've made the decision to recommend us, what do you think she's going to say? I do that again to sort of get a gauge. Is she optimistic? Is she pessimistic? By the way, here's what it works. If she's optimistic, we play devil's advocate. I think she's going to love the idea and tell me to do it. All right, God bless you. I mean, it sounds like she has a tremendous amount of confidence in you and your judgment, which is great, because that's not always the case. What if she asks you, and now I begin to play devil's advocate, right? So if she's positive, I'm devil's advocate. If she's negative, I don't know what she'll say. It just sort of depends upon the day. I know she's got a couple of competing initiatives. Then I play supportive, and I say, well, this makes sense. This is not unusual. You're certainly not alone. Let's talk through the kind of questions she may ask so that you and I can be best prepared, right? And ultimately, what I don't want my champion is to get shot down very, very quickly on that side. Now, let's say, here's another example. Let's say you've gotten to the decision maker. You were able to call high. You really thought about the strategic initiatives of the organization. You organized your value prop to feed into that. You even built a tremendous business case with help from the decision maker. And now the decision maker wants to roll it out, but we're not exactly sure how her team will handle it. Because sometimes, again, the lower decision makers may be more risk averse and unwilling to change. I'm going to give you a technique we call grappling hook. Grappling hook. And if you think about a grappling hook, it sort of grabs you and gives you a chance to sort of come on back. So what it might sound like is, and I'll say, Mr. Executive, we'll go back and forth. Mr. Executive, really, truly helpful in building a vision as to how to roll this out and working with your team in order to be able to put together the right solution. And I'll have my team work with your team to be able to craft the scope, and excited to be able to get you outcome A, B, and C. Let me ask you this. And I don't know that I see this happening. But every once in a while you're on fire for a certain goal, there may be people in the organization who have great motives, but have a different set of goals. And sometimes these things can get bogged down or stalled. If that happens, I want to make sure I can get back to you and make sure that we can break this logjam if need be and sort of help clear the way. So I've always got I've always got a grappling hook back into the executive should things fall down. So again, as we look at a complicated process and buying process, I'll give you I'll give you more than one other, but here's a couple of the things to sort of think about. One is, as you really begin to understand their buying process. Think about these 6 buckets, right? One of the things you want to be able to do in an enterprise sale, where again, there might be 6 to 10 different stakeholders, is not only do we want to relationship map it, but if you think about it, here's 6 categories, 6 buckets of beginning to understand your buyer's decision-making process. The first one is timeline. We'll call that what? WHAT, what? What's their timeline? And I don't mean timeline to make the decision. I'm not against you asking it, but this is not a great question. When do you see yourselves making this decision? Instead, what you want to do is use a reverse timeline that moves you from the left side of this line, which is today's date, February 11th or whatever it is, past the decision date, past the actual implementation date to when they're getting the economic benefit of your solution. What it may sound like is this. Mr. Decision Maker, let me ask you this. If today is 2/11, I know you're in the midst of gathering due diligence. You've got a committee assigned to this. There'll be a series of internal meetings. Ultimately, this gets let go into an RFP. There'll be RFP evaluation. Suggestions will be made. Decisions will be made. It'll be thrown over the transom potentially to procurement. That needs to happen. There are lead times that follow from there. Ultimately, everything is now on your property. You've been trained. It's been debugged. It's working, and now you're getting the benefit. When does that need to be? So think about reverse timeline, almost like a clothes hanger. I'm beginning to hang all the elements of my clients, my prospects' buying cycle onto that timeline. So what is understanding the timeline? The second bucket is what's the why behind the when. So it's not good enough to simply know their decision timelines. We want to know what's driving that timeline, because if you don't, I promise you, your forecast will push. You may win the deal, but your forecast will push. Here's what why behind the when sounds like. I generally will ask these 2 or 3 questions. So if you're looking for that to be set by September 2025, what's driving that date? What are the business drivers behind that date? Again, out of role play, if there are not strong business drivers, your forecast may push. 2, well, let me ask you this then. What are the consequences, if any, of missing that date? Again, if there are no strong consequences to missing that date, plan on, sadly, your forecast pushing. And one of my favorite questions, Mr. Decision Maker, let me ask you this then. Is status quo, is doing nothing an option? One of the worst things, well, every loss is not fun, but losing to the status quo of doing nothing after you've invested in a 9-month sales process can be frustrated as well. So again, what is the timeline? What's the why behind the when? Right? Then we also want to know the process, right? How does the paperwork specifically move through? And that's different than how do you people make decisions around here? I want to understand it specifically as it's like how a bill becomes a law, right? How does the paperwork move through the organization? And then I can work on who. Help me understand. Because again, once I understand how it moves, it goes to legal, it goes to procurement, it's IT. I can then begin to ask questions about the stakeholder landscape within that world. So I'm beginning to tie the who to what the paperwork process is, right? One of the ones that is most ignored, I'm going to give you this as the 5th one, is the decision criteria. And when I do loss analyses with a major deal, it seems to me like 75 to 80% of the time we screwed something up, we missed, we didn't ask, we got happy years in the decision-making process and understanding their buying process. And in that 70 to 80%, probably 80% is in decision criteria, not really understanding the decision criteria. As an example, you can raise your metaphorical hand or your real hand, I just can't see it. If you've ever been told the reason why you lost a deal, as you've been told, you've lost the deal, then they didn't want you to win. Let me say that again. If you've ever been told the reason why you've lost the deal, as they were telling you, you've lost the deal. It could be on price. It could be because of scalability, whatever reason they give you. They didn't want you to win, because if they wanted you to win, they would have called you first and said, hey, listen, we're having a lot of in-depth conversations here. Some of the team members are not comfortable about the scalability of your solution, and they would have come to you first. So it's important for us to understand the criteria. One of my favorite questions here is, let me ask you this. I know you're looking at a handful of alternatives and certainly excited to be one of those alternatives, assuming for a second, price aside, that you've got 3 or 4 qualified alternatives. Work me through what you're thinking. What separates those? I mean, in the end, what criteria do you use to decide among competing alternatives, price aside? And then really, really listen and understand that different stakeholders in the organization have different criteria, right? Some of them might be buying on technical merit. Some of them might be buying on financial merit or business case. Some of them may be buying on relationship or previous relationships. So it's important to understand not only what their motivations are, not only where they sit within that stakeholder roadmap from authority, influence, and advocacy. Those are 3 good ways to rate a stakeholder on influence, advocacy, and authority. But how do they make that buying decision? And then ultimately, finally, really be willing to face up and understand, what are the showstoppers? What are the things that we can talk about now that may get in the way of us working together, even if you assume we're the right solution? What I don't want to do is get in a situation where I'm told things at the end that we could have figured out early, such as, in the end, we decided to go with competitor B because they're only 20 miles away from our office. Hey, when we started this, we knew we were 200 miles away. So if there's a bomb in the middle of the road, we've got to diffuse it before it blows. Right? If we feel it, let's make sure we say it gently. A couple other things to think about. Again, I know I'm giving you a lot. I'm moving fast. Hopefully you'll replay this a couple of times and you'll think about the names. Here's another one called bureaucratic nightmare. May never have happened to you, but in some large organizations, you've got the operational folks, right, who are absolutely involved in making the decision and making the recommendation, and then they throw it over the transom to procurement. In some organizations, procurement's very strong, others not so much. But I've been in places where they've thrown it over the transom, they've skinnied down the requirements, sent those requirements out to bid, and my client loses and nobody wins. The operational side, the people don't win. My client, maybe the competitor wins, but we're not in the business of feeding their families. So bureaucratic nightmare sounds like this. Mr. Champion, let me ask you this. I know your team and my team worked very closely over the last 4 months to put together the right recommendation, which I'm super excited about and is clearly the right solution moving forward for the organization. Again, I don't know that I see this happening, but in some organizations, this then gets sort of thrown over the fence to procurement. And again, I don't know that I see this happening, but I wanted to ask. And then procurement might skinny down the requirements, right? Send this thing out to bid. All of a sudden, it comes back. We don't win that bid. You're surprised. I'm surprised. And in the end, nobody wins. What can we do, or how do we make sure that doesn't happen? So again, I don't want to get to the end. And there are salespeople, I don't believe this, who say, I've done my job as long as I've got the recommendation from operations. No, you've done your job when you get the check and it clears, is my view, right? So we've got to manage that process all the way through to the end. And if you've got a detractor, call out the detractor. Here's one way to find a detractor. An example of finding a detractor might sound like this. If you've ever been asked to do a presentation to a committee, to a group, right? It might be a beauty contest and you've got 3 people coming in your upfront contract, which is a Sandler term, is how you set agendas and gain agreements on the decisions to be made at the end of a meeting. An upfront contract might sound like this. Thanks for inviting us out. I know we have 90 minutes today, and there's a lot to do. I think you've asked specifically about our capabilities, our experience in the ABC industry, our recommendations as to how we would respond to your request for a proposal, and how we would ultimately deliver those solutions. So let's jump in on that one. 2 things, if we could, before we get started. And before we get started is another great technique, right? Hey, before we get started, as I look at the different departments in the room, I'd like to ask you 2 questions, if you could, and just jot down an answer. If you look at the part of the world that you run, and the biggest challenge, again, in your part of the world that you think XYZ can solve, if you can, just jot down the answer. Second question, as you look at deciding upon what's the right partner for you in the long term, what's the top 1 or 2 criteria that you would turn to and look for in the right partner out of role play that allows you to really customize your talking and your presentation as you move through that? The competitors haven't done it. I've seen people move from absolutely last place to win based upon those 2 questions. Last piece here. In your upfront contract. And then at the end, if we can, I know we've got 90 minutes, let's take 15 minutes at the end just to be able to go around the room and get feedback, maybe take your temperature of each of you as to whether or not we missed the mark or hit the mark. And if we missed the mark, I don't think we would, but if we missed the mark, it would be important you tell us reasons why, and maybe there's a way to adjust, or maybe you say we're eliminated. If we do thumbs up, tremendous. Then we could spend a little bit of time talking about what else might you need from me? What are the timelines? What else needs to happen between now and decision time to make sure that you're comfortable moving forward? And you could set good, clear next steps. Now, as you go around the room at the end, you pick on the highest level decision maker, the highest level of authority and influence who's in your camp. And I say, Jim, let me ask you this on a scale of 1 to 10, where 1 was you were ready to leave 89 minutes ago, you were just polite. I don't get that feeling. Where 10 says, hey, everything resonated today in your mind. We're the right choice. It's only a matter of doing the paperwork to get started. And let's say they say 9, 9.5, whatever it is. I can also isolate detractors. If someone says, I'm probably a 5. All right, talk to me a little bit about why you're a 5. And say, well, I just don't think you've got, your people have the experience level to be able to make this work. Now, this next technique is called let you and him fight, right? Don't start handling his or her objection. Take your champions and say, Jim, Deanna, Bob raises a point. He's worried about the experience level. Jim, what are your thoughts on this? Deanna, what are your thoughts on this? And you can literally hear what they're going to say as if you were out of the room, which is what's going to happen anyway, because in enterprise deals, a lot of the selling happens when you're not in the room, which is why you have to prepare your business cases with your champion and your champions and really begin to sort of relationship map who in the organization should be talking to who in the organization's solution architects, specialists, CFOs, CEOs at many times. So there's a lot going on in that world. I'll close with one last thing. We'll bring Emily back on. When you're debriefing your call, and it's important to debrief your call with the team, one of the things I tell folks is stop asking each other, how did the call go? Because if you're me, you're sort of always excited. And instead, ask yourself, how did it end? And if you can't come away, and I know it's not always possible, but if you can't come away with a specific, mutually agreed to, in the calendar next step, odds are it wasn't as good as a call as we thought it was. And the main reason why we don't have good, clear next steps, it's shocking, we don't even ask for them. We say, hey, listen, this is great information. I'll circle back with you in a week, instead of setting up a good, clear, actionable next step. So there's a lot going on. We had 30 minutes to do it. Hopefully you've got 1, 2, 3 takeaways. Emily, I don't know if there's questions, but I'll I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Sean. That was super insightful. I really love all the examples you brought to the table too, because it's so much like the real gold we can implement in those conversations. And sometimes it's hard to ask those questions. So kind of having those talk tracks to walk away with are so important. There was one question actually, and it was about the scenario. If you think 2 or 3 scenarios back when you were talking about when you're at the room with the decision makers and they're telling you that you weren't chosen, they're telling you no, but it's kind of like they didn't give you the feedback beforehand. They just sort of said, hey, we didn't choose you and here's why. They're giving that feedback right at the moment they're telling you the no. In your mind, are those accounts that are worth down the road perhaps trying to recapture, or are those kind of accounts that you would say we close the file on permanently?
No, I listen, if you're dealing with a major account, you never close the file on the account. You close the file on an opportunity. In a large account, something is always, every 3 months, something's changing. Someone's getting bought, sold, fired, hired, divested. So the other thing I find though is even if it's over, it ain't over till we say it's over. So a lot of times it might sound like, Emily, I appreciate the candor. Would like to spend a little bit of time and get a little bit of a data dump, understand where we went wrong. And I go in completely with my eyes open, Emily. I understand that you've made a decision to move in another direction, and I got that. But saying that last phrase allows you to sort of get in. And then sometimes there was a crack in that armor. And you want to be useful, so you close the file on an opportunity. You don't close the file on an account.
I love that. That's a great way to look at it, because I know sometimes walking away from that, you can almost feel that, obviously it's sad. You feel that dejection or feel like, well, that's it forever. But I love that you're kind of keeping that open mind and thinking of it as, well, this is an opportunity to learn and then come back, like you said, maybe down the road. And that's a new opportunity to do better and take what you've learned in this process and apply it down the road. So I think that's fantastic. Well, that's all the questions that we had today, but I did want to let our viewers know that there will be in the follow-up emails a link to the recording of today's session if you want to play it back again or search within it. There also will be a handout that will help you see how to use DISC to win more allies in these complex decisions. So make sure you keep an eye out for that PDF coming your way. It'll be a truly helpful resource. And as always, making sure that you guys give a shout out here for that summit. You guys get your information on summit tickets. Check out sandler.com/summit to get your tickets reserved, get your spots, get your travel booked. We hope to see you there in Orlando with us April 2nd and 3rd. John will be there and many other speakers. So we look forward to having you. And John, thank you again so much for being with us today. Thank you all for tuning in, and we'll see you soon. In the meantime, good selling.
Thanks, Emily.